This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Adam Carolla.
Yeah, get it on. Got to get it on. No choice but to get on. Mandate. Get it on. And welcome to the best hour in the universe. It's Reasonable Doubt. I'm Adam Carolla. That's Mark Garrigus at his office, holding down the fort. How you doing, Mark?
I could not be better. If there's constitutional rights to be vindicated, I'm your man.
What's going on out there? And what is your take on like what went on in Michigan and other acts of civil disobedience and protests like that?
Well, I saw the Michigan protest. We were contacted. I mean, it's usually the case. Some of the people contacted us, asked if we wanted to get involved. The problem is that I'm not licensed in Michigan. And I've got my hands full here in LA and California, as you can imagine. I mean, one of my erstwhile clients and friends, Mia St. John, is trying to hold AA meetings under 10 people, 6 feet apart, wearing masks. And they actually send cops in to shut them down.
Really?
And, yeah. Now, is there any damage model that I can come up with that's going to make that worth my time? Probably not. But at the same time, does that make my blood boil? Yeah, especially because our good mayor has deemed liquor stores and liquor delivery to be an essential service, cannabis to be an essential service, yet AA meetings we have to shut down in the face of, by the way, science doesn't matter because the World Health Organization has just said that excessive alcohol use makes you more susceptible to this virus. I don't know if I accept that either, but at least that's what the science is saying. So I'm going to probably, with Mia's permission, probably do something next week on that. I've filed since last week. We filed 5 new cases against both the mayor and various insurance companies. And now, and just this week, the insurance commissioner weighed in, jumping on our bandwagon, so to speak. Ricardo Lara issued a directive to the insurance companies that they better do something about this and take a look at the business interruption.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was talking to Drew, who I brought this up, and Gary can probably find it. But when George Bush was president, if you remember, when you lived in Los Angeles, there were a lot of bumper stickers that said dissent is patriotic.
Yeah, I remember.
All right. Then in Los Angeles, when President Obama was elected, they got rid of all the bumper stickers because now dissent is not that. Now dissent is racist. You see, so it went from patriotic to racist. Now, I don't know what we should do, but I'm just saying to the same people who were telling us dissent is patriotic, those are the same people that are ratting out their neighbors for walking their dog without a fucking respirator on. So which is it, bitches?
You've got a mayor here who actually is encouraging people and calls them snitches, says snitches get rewards.
Right.
And I keep saying this. I've said this for 3 years with you on the podcast. I never thought that I would get to the point where the Republican Party talking points, never in my wildest dreams did I think that the Republicans would be the ones arguing for individual rights and that they would be articulating the positions that I've been screaming about for 35 years. I just never thought that would happen. I remember 35 years ago when, it was kind of like the tough on crime, throw everybody away, blah, blah, blah. Now we've got the First Step Act coming out of this administration. We need criminal justice reform. We've got all of a sudden, I've got, people making inquiries of me as to help them protect their First Amendment rights and their right to protest. The world has gone completely upside down.
Well, and this is this sort of piggybacks nicely on our discussions for the last few years about the Republicans are going after the FBI and the CIA and want transparency. The Democrats are defending the CIA and the FBI and the Steele dossier and telling everyone to go back to their desk, nothing to see here. That's something that is flipped. That's a script that's flipped.
The trial that I just did earlier this year in Utah against Maine Justice. Maine Justice is where the Department of Justice is kind of the ground zero for where William Barr is and where the Department of Justice is, and the prosecutors were from Washington, D.C. And they had invoked in that case what's called the Classified Information Protection Act, CIPA. They had invoked, there was all kinds of kind of subtext around that. But you sit there for 8 weeks and you see what happens. And if you see your US government in action, you can't help but say, okay, you can hate Trump. You can say you don't agree with Trump on, check the box on virtually every issue, which is, by the way, in large part, there is not Venn diagrams with great overlap between his social policies and mine. I mean, we don't agree on a whole lot, but there are quite a few positions that he has articulated and that some of his supporters have articulated that are spot on and that used to be the Democratic talking points, but we have completely flipped. And why people who are supposed observers of the human condition can't say, or at least be intellectually consistent or honest enough to say, yeah, boy, this is kind of ironic that the position I held 20 years ago, 10 years ago, now is being articulated by somebody who I despise. So therefore, I'm going to abandon that ideological position.
Well, for me, when you talk, I'll put it to you this way. Let's just take voices in the media. There's you and there's Ben Shapiro, for instance. And Ben Shapiro, and I count both of you as friends, and I think of you both as intellectual giants, like very, very good functioning minds. Ben Shapiro and you are pretty far apart politically, but Ben Shapiro, who agrees with Trump 80% of the time, still carves out 20% to talk about what the mistakes he's making and why he shouldn't have never said this or tweeted that or whatever it is. You, who disagree with Trump 80% of the time, still carve out 20% to say, well, you do have to give the devil his due here. He's trying to take China and the WHO, and he wants to punish them, and they deserve to be punished. And so I agree with him on that point.
Right.
I don't. Right.
So
now,
so interesting.
But so now,
interesting.
Here's the offshoot. You disagree 80% and agree 20. Ben disagrees 20 and agrees 80. But when I want to get an honest opinion, I now want to hear what you two have to say, because I do feel like I'm going to get your honest, unfettered opinion. I cannot say as much about the op-ed in the New York Times anymore, because if you read the op-ed in the New York Times, when Kavanaugh was being taken out to the woodshed, they were all in. Every woman must be believed, every voice must be heard, everything like that. Then Joe Biden comes out with a Me Too moment, and the op-ed opinion on the New York Times says nothing to see here. Now, well, that's right. Inconsistent.
And by the way, the complaint was during Kavanaugh that, and this started, by the way, with Me Too, Time's Up and the whole thing. I understand that, and because I've lived it, I've watched it firsthand, I've represented countless women. I won't even go through the bona fides on it. Does Hollywood have this kind of weird culture when it comes to women? Abso-fucking-lutely. I mean, there is no question about it. Is there a kind of, I'll call it pay to play, for lack of a better term, in Hollywood? Absolutely. However, that does not mean that you get to cloak yourself with, you must believe all women. I've been in a courtroom countless times where I've cross-examined women who, it turned out, ultimately, at the end of the day, even young women who, were daughters, in a criminal case accusing the father of molestation, and then it turned out that they were parroting what the mother had said out of a family law case, and this was a way to get assets or custody. You understand that just because somebody says something doesn't mean you forfeit your right to ask questions, to be intellectually curious, or to do what I do, which is cross-examine. And that's what they were asking you to do. Democrats, who for years were talking about the presumption of innocence, all of a sudden just says, hey, presumption of innocence? No, you just have to believe somebody because of their status. By the way, status crimes were eliminated 20 years ago, 30 years ago in California. They were obliterated. You could not be arrested for being a quote unquote drug addict because that was a status crime. Well, it's the same argument when you say somebody can't be cross-examined. They must be believed because of their status, whether their status derives from gender or their status derives from victimhood or some other concept. That does not give you an inside track on the truth.
Well, speaking of the truth, my thing is I would like to read the New York Times or watch a news outlet and think there was no biases there, unless it was a show that wasn't the news or it was an opinion-based thing. So if you're going to go after Kavanaugh, fine. Now you have to give equal time to Biden and his accuser. And if you don't, then the next time you want to go after a Kavanaugh type, I'm going to think it's dubious. That's the problem.
I'll give you two words: Al Franken. I mean, that, the Democrats sacrificed a voice who was a great voice, who was a great proponent, and they sacrificed it based on a complete mob kind of hanging, lynching in the media. That was, there was no reason why he should have resigned ever.
Well, the sad thing about Al Franken that you brought up is because of your proclamation that all voices need to be believed, that every woman needs to be believed, you essentially make this proclamation: all women need to be believed, forget about due process. And then 10 minutes later, someone from your own camp gets Me Too'd, and you go, well, now you must be sacrificed to the volcano gods of Me Too, even though you're in our own camp, but we did say everyone needs to be believed, and so sorry, you're expendable.
Right. And your point is precisely what kind of my argument has been. The problem with this is the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy is what will always get you. I always, and this is why people, they can't wrap their heads around it. I try to always at least, adhere to the presumption of innocence. I don't care when somebody makes an accusation. Anybody can make an accusation. You can accuse anybody of anything. I've been accused of things. You've been accused of things. Drew has been accused of things. If you don't know, if you don't have the facts, you don't know. And until you can test somebody in some kind of a crucible, then far be it for you to say, well, it must be true. And this applies also to numbers. This idea that, well, if it's one, okay. But boy, if it's 2, 3, 4, or 50, then it must be true. Quantity does not trump quality, if you know what I mean. And that doesn't work either.
There's only one instance where that doesn't hold together, which is all former Ellen employees think she's a witch, and I believe that.
I can't talk about that. There's a boring cop connection there that I won't get into. So I'm going to have to. Boring cop may. I don't know what we'll do with it. I've heard that, by the way. What is that about Ellen anyway? Where does that stem from, or where did that start?
Well, I like to observe people and just sort of watch and wonder. And I had a couple of experiences where first off, I used to watch her dance at the beginning of every show. And I thought, who dances at the beginning of every show? And I thought, The only other person that danced at the beginning of their show was Bill Cosby. So I thought,
wow.
what are they trying to, why are they trying to get us to think this way about them? That's always my thought. And so when I see people with bumper stickers that say who saved who with a paw on it, I think to myself, why do you want me to think this way? What are you saying? Even a guy with a ponytail or an earring, I'm always asking, why are you trying to get me to think this way about you? And then why is that important to you? And then what do you not want me to know about you that you're going to hide behind the veil of the dance or the ponytail or whatever it is, the bumper sticker? What is this thing that you don't want me to know? Now, when I see guys like you or guys like Drew or many of the people I work with, men and women or whatever, sometimes the answer is just nothing. I wear sweatpants and flip-flops. I don't have tattoos. There's nothing. I'm not trying to get you to think this way about me. But when I see somebody engage in a behavior, it can be good behavior. I still want to know what it is they're trying to make, why they want me to think a certain way about them. So I did notice Ellen dancing, and then I went and did Ellen's show, and I always judge the boss by the concern of the lieutenants in the Army. Are people nervous? Are they agitated? And I noticed when I did Ellen, my segment producer sort of kept coming into the room a little bit agitated, saying, "You're not going to talk about this. You're not going to, and obviously I have many comparisons. I've done every show. And I can tell the shows when you do Jimmy Kimmel Live, no one's agitated, no one's upset, no one's scared. When you do Jay Leno's show, everyone's relaxed. I mean, back in the day, the Tonight Show.
Right.
But I noticed a level of agitation.
Although the Jay Leno, if you don't bring chicken sandwiches, there can be a problem.
I noticed the level of agitation was kind of high. The fear level was high. And then also, I was at an event that Ellen had attended as well, and they had a world-class
with Portia
orchestra. Yes, a world-class orchestra playing all night, and everyone danced, but not Ellen. So then I thought to myself, does she love dancing? Because if she does love dancing, it's like a Geico commercial. You'd be happier than Ellen at a wedding with a big band. You know what I mean? Right. If she did love dancing, she should be dancing the night away, but she didn't dance once and everyone else danced. So I thought, well, does she love dancing or does she love me to think she loves dancing? And then I started going back into my profiling.
That's also very interesting. Can I interject here for a sec? Because one of the things, it really originated with my father, and I've kind of empirically and anecdotally confirmed his theory. He always used to say that the clerk and court reporter in a courtroom always reflect the personality of the judge. If the judge is a 14-karat asshole, the clerk and the court reporter tend to be the same. And back in the days when there was an assigned bailiff to that courtroom. And so I suppose you do it by the agitation level. I do it, I guess, by the quirkiness or the personality of the court personnel. If they're a long time, personnel, do they end up reflecting the judicial demeanor as well?
Well, look, how could it go any other way? I mean, we all had friends when we were kids. We all had that friend that had the dad with the crew cut who was, the great Santini, super strict guy. And when I'd be over at David Vendig's house and Mr. Vendig would pull up in his Oldsmobile, everyone scattered, right?
Yeah, it was like Steve Fulton's dad. It was the same thing. Fulton's dad he was the great Santini.
Right. I came walking to my house about a year ago. One of Natalia's friends went by me in roller skates, going down the entry, holding a bag of Cheetos, and went right back by me in roller skates and literally, high-fived me and just went by. And I thought, oh, okay, I guess I'm not Mr. Vendick. Evidently, I'm not striking any fear into the hearts of anybody around here. judging by the roller derby that's going on inside the house with the bag of Cheetos, right?
On what kind of floor, by the way, is being roller skated on?
A high-end, hardwood floor.
Oh
So,
God, that would drive me. I'd go nuts. But
well,
I
now
wouldn't have to worry. Paulette would behead. Literally, Paulette would behead one of Jake or Tenny's friends if they did that.
right. So you realize that when I would go to Mr. Vendig's house, I would feel one way about being at Mr. Vendig's house. And when Natalia's friend goes to Mr. Carolla's house, she doesn't share those feelings.
Right.
That's
But
what I would say.
do you become like, are you cool dad? Do your kids' friends think of you as cool dad?
I do. I screw around with them. I make jokes with them, and I tend to try to embarrass them as best I
Best
can.
you
So
can. Yeah.
probably, but the point is the fear that I experience with my segment producer at Ellen. I am not. My kids evidently don't experience that with me, or they would act accordingly. As I once famously said to Lynette, at some point, she said to me, God, it's like 10 years ago, she went, "You scare me." And I said, God, I wish that was true. It would be awesome. So I want to drill down on this a little bit,
Okay.
vis-a-vis boring cop. So there was a big online thing about a month ago where somebody who was a former Ellen employee said, send in all your Ellen horror stories. And
this is a new one from about a day or two ago where apparently
really?
her staff is very upset because no one has talked to them. They can't get any clarity on payment or healthcare. I don't think Mark's going to have a lot to say on this topic based on when it broke, but
wait, did this break today or yesterday?
April 16th, so that would be yesterday as we record, 2 days ago as you listen. This was yesterday afternoon, early evening.
Wow. You know,
I once, and then we can drill down a little bit. I once spoke to a person who was a staff member for quite some time for Ellen, just, kind of off the record. And I said to the person, I got some sort of bad feelings about Ellen, but you tell me, you worked there for 5 years. What, am I right or am I wrong? And the person, who's a very sober and thoughtful person, said, worst person I've ever met. And then paused. And I said something like, oh, worst boss you ever had? And they paused and they said, no, worst person, just worst person. And I thought, wow, how did we get there? And then,
well, yeah, what's amazing though is she's got a very loyal, dedicated following that seems to adore her, right?
I damn-lutely. But I also, as a template, think about Rosie O'Donnell, the former version of her with the cutie patootie chub club, and how she loved David Cassidy and wore a lot of pastels. And now I'm picturing the real version of Rosie O'Donnell, and I realize that was constructed for the audience. So again, none of this is hard science. It's just me doing my constructions in my head. It may all be false. I have no idea, but I will say this: I've never been wrong. So,
well, the Ellen problem, the one thing I do have to say about that, the confusion around the furloughs and the pay and the things like that. I mean, I understand, I'm not in that position as being the person who's receiving, signing the back of the check. I'm the person signing the front of the check. And I know that there's anxiety there. But at the same time, I'm struggling with right now, you've got the Paycheck Protection Act, and it's becoming apparent, at least anecdotally, because we're looking at this, that you have to have had a really good relationship with your bank in order to get kind of up to the top of the line or the top of the pile in order to get the money. And it was reported today, for instance, that $30 million of the act money went to Ruth Chris Steakhouse, got 20 million. The Potbelly, whatever that fast casual outlet is, Potbelly sandwiches or whatever, they got 10 million. So that 30 million for those two organizations. Whereas I'm inundated with mom and pop operations that weren't able to get their money, that their bankers didn't do it, that their bankers kind of, dropped the ball left and right. In fact, we're looking right now at banker liability, and I may file a case on Monday or Tuesday of one bank that just affirmatively lied. It looks to me like Wells Fargo went out of their way to basically dump all their small business customers and just focus on their larger customers. And so once again, you see this idea that the employees are wondering, how am I going to survive? But you have to understand that the employers, depending on who you are, they've got to also, there isn't an endless supply of money, unlike, unless you're the government thinking you can just print money into oblivion. There's got to be some kind of communication, don't you think?
Well, it can't go any other way because we're human. We're all wired the same way. Everyone has foibles. The money is coming in sort of for free to some extent and a little bit unspoken for in terms of how it's distributed. So it's going to just happen that way. I mean, there's certain things that are just kind of built in to our DNA and our wiring. It's sort of, it's like when they go, well, we're going to tack on an 8% surcharge per gallon of gas just until we finish the road work, and then we're just going to head and pull it. It never gets taken down. They're just
right. The high income tax surcharge in California, which Jerry Brown promised was only going to last a couple of years. He promised. He told me that, is sitting in this very building downstairs, and then completely lied and put it on the ballot because he knew when he got voted on, who's not going to surcharge high earners.
Right. So there are just certain things that are woven into our DNA. They could go no other way. I mean, look no further than everyone's relationship with China. It's sad, but it's true. And if we were being intellectually honest, we would all admit that even though we want more from Nike, or we want more from the NBA, or we want more from whoever's outsourced their aftermarket car parts to China or whatever. I've been in this position where they come to you and they go, the beer koozie with the Corolla label on it can get made for 28 cents in China, or it's going to cost $1.55 if we do it in Austin. And I go, okay, well, we'll just get it the cheapest you can get it. Like that's how we're wired. We're not wired to do the right thing. We're wired to sort of take the path of least resistance. So if you take large quantities of money and you drop it off to anybody and you tell them, do the right thing, they're going to start doing what's best for them, which is not usually the right thing.
Right. And that's a real problem. I mean, this kind of free for all that has happened here. I think you're going to see some horror stories. I mean, that's my prediction. How is it that roughly that much money evaporates in 2 weeks and large chunks of it go to just one or two entities? I mean, the idea that a restaurant chain could apply for every single restaurant, well, that's great. But maybe if you're kind of doing the social engineering and your idea is you're trying to save jobs and trying to save the economy, maybe you say, well, that's fine, but they're the ones who have to wait in line, not the people who have one or two or three outlets. And I'm speaking for myself, and I've got my own bias as well, because I've got only 6 different restaurants around. But why is a chain of 500 at the front of that line and only because they've got the banking relationship?
Well, I think at the low end of the humanity level, whenever there's a tragedy like this, you're going to have people setting up fake charities and trying to grift money from people online. And at the high end, there's going to be white collar bankers showing favoritism to certain clients. And it's a spectrum. It's definitely a spectrum type thing, but because human nature is, I've always just kind of said it's not good or bad. It's just weak. And when it's weak, you do bad things. Someone in that bank would have to stand up and go, I don't care if it benefits us. What's right is right. And that's just
Right.
like you'd say, hey, Apple, don't, do your manufacturing in Wisconsin. Don't do it in China. I don't care if it adds $7 per unit to the whatever. Well, that's them. You're asking them to do what's right. And that's not what works. You have to compel people, sadly, to oftentimes to do what's right.
Right. I've often said, and it's interesting because I think we've got an ad for LegalZoom coming up. And sometimes, the idea LegalZoom, when they were created, they had to kind of fight in every jurisdiction to get in there because the bar was such that the bar kind of closed ranks in various jurisdictions, not wanting to come in because it kind of siphoned off a bunch of the business that really you didn't need to have a lawyer do. It could have been done online. If you give the IKEA example, which I love, and I've used that a zillion times with people, where you say, look, you come to me to do something when I'm doing construction, you're better off just going to IKEA to buy it. Well, if lawyers wanted to do what was right for clients, LegalZoom would have existed and wouldn't have had to have jumped through so many hoops and spend $1 zillion with regulators, right?
Well, look no further than taxi cabs and Uber,
Right.
and they always hide behind safety, right? Like, this is dangerous. Our guys, first off, have you met any of your cab drivers in New York or LA? Most of these guys.
Hey, watch it. I may have to take the fifth because there's a large Armenian contingent. I mean, you have no idea how many free cab rides I get from hey, Mr. Jarvis. Most
of the guys I've had look like they tunneled out of Guantanamo Bay and then crawled into the exhaust pipe of that Chevy, and I'm now driving it. Certainly. So, number one, obviously safety, not a huge concern in that world. But the point is yes, there's no difference between the cab drivers and their medallions and Uber. You guys had the market cornered. This new company came in and said, we can do what you're doing and we'll do it faster and we'll do it cheaper. And you went, get out of my face. Now, what you do is I look at you as a limo driver or something, which is you drive dignitaries in an armor-plated vehicle. Like, what you do is necessary, and that's not going to be replaced by the lady up the street driving the Camry. But what you do legally is that. And what I would say to people, just to put a finer point on it, when I was a cabinet maker and people would say to me, I want a custom bedside something or bureau, I would say, if you can find it at IKEA, go get it. Because I'll never be able to do it for their price. But if you need something custom, we can talk. And that'll lead me nicely into LegalZoom. But I do want to tease out.
I want to talk about it on the other side. Tease it up.
I want to tease out Ellen a little more. I'm curious what was going on there. But I do have a question for you. And I was just talking to Dr. Drew about this because, I was talking to Dr. Drew an hour ago. And I said, I go online, I'm reading tweets about you, about me, calling you a racist, calling me a racist. It's like, at what point do you get to take legal action against, semi-prominent people calling you this? Like, I could go, hey, man, I got to work in Hollywood. That's hurting my business. At some point, you've got to make your point or you're going to get sued. All right, let me hit the LegalZoom. Health and safety on everyone's mind. Make sure your loved ones are protected. At LegalZoom, that's a reliable way to set up the right estate plan without leaving your home. You want a last will and testament, living trust. What about advanced healthcare directive? What about power of attorney? Don't try to figure out everything on your own. You need LegalZoom. So you need to speak to an attorney. Their independent attorney network will be there to guide you and advise you. LegalZoom isn't a law firm, so you won't have to worry about the expensive, hold your ears, Mark, billable hours adding up. It is LegalZoom. Right, Gary?
That's absolutely right. Take an important step for your family today. Go to LegalZoom.com to get started on a last will, living trust, and more. Or find out how you can speak to an attorney for advice on the right estate plan. LegalZoom, where life meets legal.
So
you know,
can Ellen sue the guy who starts this online petition about her being the worst boss in the world?
Anybody can sue. I always say anybody can sue anybody for anything. Whether you survive that is a whole different issue. For instance, that the person in my personal situation, the Dario brothers and their lawyer, some woman, speaking of Uber drivers, was apparently sued me and the law firm for something reasonable doubt related, which I had never even said. And a federal judge took a look at it and dismissed it. I mean, threw it out. So there's always that, and there'll be consequences for that. And we'll get to that. I'll save that for another show. But in a day and age, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about this. We talked a couple of episodes ago about property damage and suing for business interruption and casualty loss, and then we'll come back to Drew. There was a case this week in Pennsylvania, which I love the name of the case. It's Friends of DeVito versus Wolf. So the first thing I'm thinking, why is Danny DeVito suing, or why are his friends suing Wolf? But basically, the court there ruled, and we talked about this 3 weeks ago, the court there ruled, hey, this pandemic is no different as you made the argument, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is now saying the same thing, that it's no different than an earthquake, a fire, or any other casualty event for which property-based insurance coverage has always been intended to provide coverage for. And so they've said that now in Pennsylvania. And so it's only a matter of time before some court here picks up that, rules the same way, and the insurance companies, because part of what's going on here is the insurance companies have decided, we've got your money, we don't want to pay it out. And by the way, if we got to start paying business interruption coverage, that's really going to hurt our bottom line. And so instead, we're going to sit on your cash float. And as the stock market gets battered, we'll go running in there and buy stocks and do whatever where we get a better return than paying you out. That's my little kind of soapbox today. Can Ellen sue? Yeah, Ellen can sue. But I'll tell you who's got a better case, and that's probably Drew. Because Drew's, you've seen the mashup that somebody on their burner account did. That mashup was so taken out of context and so misleading that it wouldn't surprise me at some point if some friend of Drew, like Friends of DeVito, decides that they're going to sue that particular person. And it wouldn't surprise me if that person is unmasked as somebody with an axe to grind. I've done a little myself. And
sorry, repeat.
Point,
sorry, you seized up.
Talked about,
repeat the last 20 seconds. Sorry, it was a snafu. Go ahead.
It wouldn't surprise me that when I've done a little sleuthing myself, that the person who did that mashup against Drew, which by the way was totally misleading, it wouldn't surprise me if that person had an axe to grind, if that person wasn't on the payroll of a pharmaceutical company, or didn't get pharmaceutical funding and didn't like what it was that Drew was saying. And that might have been one of the reasons for kind of the mashup and doing whatever. When you can show that kind of stuff, that if that turns out to be the case, or if you can show that there was a financial motive for doing the damage, then that is where you tend to cross the line.
Also, I'm guessing on the other end, pain and suffering, if you have death threats and things of that nature, and the family had to move or hunker down or whatever that is, that also probably is folded in as well, correct?
When you've got whether it's it's a very high bar, but the cause of action for intentional infliction of emotional distress, where you do something intentionally, generally has got to show that there's some kind of physical damage, or that there's kind of various elements you have to meet. But if that's the case, that's where people end up getting whacked. I mean, that's where a jury will find that that you need to pay, basically.
Well, this is interesting because this is all happening faster than our courts, or certainly founding fathers, could keep up with. So nobody knew there was going to be doxing, but
Right.
for instance, there is some precedent now, which is kind of Nicholas Sandmann, right? Like,
Right.
you
Right.
basically went now, CNN is not a mashup video on Twitter, but CNN is an outlet to express opinions and or news. And when CNN expresses an inaccurate piece of news or opinion, especially when it's presented as news and somebody's life is damaged, then CNN must try to make that person whole again, and did. And I don't know where the Nicholas Sandmann thing is. Maybe Garrett can look it up. Now, this is stuff that really didn't exist to a great deal, but we're going to have to start setting precedent. So if somebody takes to Twitter, says Dr. Drew's a racist or a misogynist or whatever, then puts his address out there and says, go get him, somebody is going to have to process that and do something about it. And what it'll serve is the next 16-year-old kid who stands up in front of a crazy Indian, that kid's life is not going to be destroyed, because these news outlets are going to have to think twice about pushing a narrative out there that's a cooked narrative that's going to hurt somebody's life, because that person's going to lawyer up. And the next time someone wants to make a mashup video about Dr. Drew or any celebrity and push it out there, then they're going to have to think for a second before they hit send. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, there is, the founding fathers dealt with whether it was Thomas Paine and others in pamphleteers, and there was, it was rough and tumble. They understood that, but it was usually in the contours of the First Amendment were kind of painted, the lines around it were painted such that there was, I don't want to call it Marcus of Queensberry, but there were rules for political discourse. That was what was called core speech. And those kinds of things were fair game. But when you cross, there are certain lines, and obviously they're always hard to draw. Famously, obscenity, it was always, Larry Flint was a guy who was always fighting the battle on obscenity with Hustler. And that famous line about, I know it when I see it, I forget which Supreme Court justice, but there's always kind of a line that you're trying to draw as to what is fair free speech, what is core speech. And it's usually at the fringes where it becomes most difficult. And when you destroy somebody, or you try to destroy somebody, and it's not fair, or your motives weren't fair, that can become an issue. I know that because I've dealt with it with people who try to wrap themselves up in it as a defense. Will say, you can't say that because you've got no basis. I can say back, well, yes, I've got a basis. I've got a client who told me, and I'm saying it based on what that client tells me, that this particular person is a predator. This is what I know. This is the real-time kind of evidence that I've gathered and satisfied myself, and I've talked to others, blah, blah, blah. Do you have to believe me? No, but you can test it. I can cross-examine. I can see. I know, blah. I mean, those are the kinds of things. You have to have a good faith basis to do it. Here, if your narrative is not a good faith basis, but you want to kind of, as you call it, what did you call it? The phony narrative, the kind of cut and paste, or the don't bother me with the facts, or I don't want to disclose the smoking gun, those kinds of things. That's a problem.
Well, it's pretty provable, because if you're the news eh, is supposed to be like surveillance footage in a 7-Eleven, and you're just filming without any bias what happened at the counter of the 7-Eleven.
Or
But
a body cam.
but if you're cutting and pasting and editing to create something very different out of that piece of footage, then you're no longer should have the mantle of news. It's now commentary. According to this, by the way, CNN, which settled out in January, is they're still working on other cases, but there's no more Nicholas Salmon cases that are moving ahead, or we have any further updates on. So for you, what is your take on the civil sort of disobedience, the people in Michigan, the people that drove their cars and went down to the state house or the courthouse or wherever they went? What is your head on this? I've talked to people about it, and I have my own observations, but what do you think?
I know what the here's the argument. The argument is, and I think I saw the governor articulate it the other day, and the governor of Michigan said, the irony is that these people who are complaining about the stay-at-home order have now congregated, and therefore they're going to, the very thing they're complaining about, they've elongated, they're going to prolong the stay-at-home order. Well, my position would be, you told me 3 weeks ago that we didn't need masks, right? You told me 3 weeks ago that it couldn't be transmitted asymptomatically 5 weeks ago. You told me that we were going to be 15,000 ventilators short as recently as 21 days ago. You told me this, you told me that. I don't know that I'm willing to sign on to stripping all of our constitutional rights based on science that seems to change every day or by the hour. And that's a little irritating to me. I read today, all of a sudden, that now it was an article that was just published this morning, that one of the reasons that this seems to have a deleterious effect to people under the age of 60 is not so much a pre-existing condition, unless you want to say the pre-existing condition is obesity. And that for people under 60, obesity seems to correlate both anecdotally and data-wise to people who have problems with this virus. So what are we doing next? Are we going to say that just obese people have to stay home? Is that going to be the new edict? And then are they going to complain? I mean, we're in a no man's land with these orders that are being issued that have not been thought out, that aren't based on science, that are based on whatever the minute by minute understanding of something is. You and I talked last week about herd immunity and whether or not herd immunity has taken hold in California. And that may be the real reason why California is not getting hit hard, because obviously the Chinese connection to LAX and to San Francisco was a lot stronger than any place else in the country. And maybe what we thought was severe flu back in December and January was in fact this. And that, rather than the stay-at-home order, is why we're not getting hit so hard, that we may have already have passed our peak. If that's the case, in retrospect, are we going to say, well, that's okay, and we gave up our constitutional rights based on some bad science? I mean, those are questions that you just don't hear a whole lot of people talking about.
Well, it's interesting because there's a physiological side to this, and then there's a sort of psychological, emotional side of it. First off, my new world order is unintended consequences. Like, if the people that are most greatly negatively affected by this are obese. So we say, hey, fatty, stay in your apartment and wait for Grubhub. Guess who's going to pack on a few more pounds? So
Right.
number one, they're also, they're saying things like sunlight really works or is a positive for this, but they're telling everyone to stay inside. So, it's
Right.
we're fighting a lot of our own advice.
And they're closing the trails, by the way,
Right.
which are the most remote and kind of isolated places for you to go. Also, they're telling people to go inside and congregate together. And so what do? You've got grandparents or people over 60 who are now confined to a house with people who are apparently asymptomatic. So you may actually be doing the opposite of what you were supposed to do. And you have to look no farther than nursing homes, which are being devastated because you've got people from the outside going into the nursing homes, and that's where it's spreading.
Well, I've been watching Sweden a little. I saw a guy a professor from USC, I think, talking about it. The herd immunity thing seems to be what we're learning from Sweden, and this second wave that is coming around. Again, we have to leave our house at some point. So how are we then prepared for the second wave? I sort of agree that everything is things can be counterintuitive sometimes, but I'll tell you, remember back in the day when they would say that someone comes into the schoolroom with a gun or a terrorist takes over an airplane, and the advice always used to be just do what they say, just sit down, don't move, just give them your wallet, do whatever, just do what they say. And we quickly figured out that if someone's coming in your schoolroom and they want to shoot it up, you're going to have to take your shoe off and throw it at him or charge him or something, doing what they say, whether you're in an airplane that goes into the side of the World Trade Center or in your school that's getting shot up. We've now figured out, let's roll. You got to charge the cockpit. That's what you have to do. And when it comes to this kind of stuff, the pandemic stuff, I think we're still in the just stay at home, hunker down, and do what they say. But that doesn't mean there's a logic or even a science to it, depending on who you talk to. So I know it sounds
and
safe.
The science is changing day by day. I mean, all you've got to do is take a look at what they were telling you 3 weeks ago. Take a look at what they were telling you 4 weeks ago. Look at what they were telling you 2 weeks ago. And they can't explain it. By the way, all of this is based on modeling. If these people knew how to model, and you trusted them to do the modeling, and the modeling was correct, none of it has been correct. It's no different than economists who model the economy. So why is it that you necessarily are making life and death decisions based on some academic who you wouldn't trust to go grocery shopping for you?
Well, I know all roads lead to Dr. Drew, but I said to Dr. Drew the other day, literally yesterday, I said, Drew, I was walking on the horse trail, by the way.
Right. Did you go, but I don't want you to make it a confession, but did you happen to kind of push through the yellow tape?
Phil actually rammed some of the tape. He mashed right. He went full Kool-Aid on some of the yellow tape. But I was walking down the horse trail and I was talking to Drew, and I said, Drew, you are being eviscerated in the public square because allegedly your numbers were off in the low department. Although in California, he's certainly going to turn out to be more accurate than the experts. I said, you were off by, 20% low. These guys were off by magnitudes of tens of hundreds of more than that in the high department. Why don't these people get to go out to the fucking woodshed and get a beating? So, the number. So here's the deal. So you said, just for the sake of argument, California is going to have, I don't know, let's just say for the sake of argument, California, the death toll is 25,000 when the dust settles, for the sake of argument. So Drew said there'd be 15,000 or 20,000. Okay, he shot low. Many people said there'd be 2 million. So what about them? When do they get punished? Why do they just skate? They panic the shit out of everybody and they move on to the next crisis.
And by the
Drew
way,
gets punished.
How about the hypocrisy of saying that Drew, trying to take Drew to the woodshed on this and saying that he was too low, when by the way, he wasn't too low. And the people who say, oh my God, you're playing God with death. Hello, every single model is playing God with death. That's what the model is. The model is modeling hospitalizations, mortality rates, and the number of infected. So death is one of the components of the modeling. The whole thing is like, it's really watching a mentally ill person go through the kinds of connections that schizophrenics do.
Yeah. Thankfully, I only live with two of them. Sonny and Phil are unfazed. All right, let's go out on a funny note.
On a funny note, I love it. Thank you.
You can go to adamcarolla.com and see what I'm up to. Check out my new book. I just was working on the audiobook about an hour and a half ago before I came here. That's coming out. I'm Your Emotional Support Animal, available for pre-order on Amazon and the audiobook as well. And go to Chassis, CHASSY, and get all our great movies. I was so happy when I talked to Mark the other day and he had watched a 24-hour war.
It is so good. I'm telling you, I was enthralled by it. In fact, it's funny, the 24-hour war makes me now want to watch Ford versus Ferrari, not the other way around. I mean, the 24-hour war was captivating. I stayed up late watching it. You did great work.
Well, thanks. And you can get the Blu-ray of that if you like over at Chassis. And you can go to our YouTube page and watch. I got a lot of stand-up over there at youtube.com/Adam Carolla. Mark, any plugs?
The only plugs I've got is if you're in downtown LA, we got Tenny and Engine Company 28 now delivering. Call up, mention Reasonable Doubt. We may throw something in for you for free.
So until next time, Adam Carolla for Mark Garriga saying mahalo.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Tune in next Saturday for an all-new episode.